We are extremely honored to have this panel on stage with us for Creative Week. We have a professor and a Broadway producer and a filmmaker, and didn't you leave already? Why are you even up here?
Hi, I'm Johnny Cash.
And friend to the family, Paul Lavoie of TAXI. So this is a great session. We're really glad that you could make it. And without further ado, a professor at NYU Stern, a man worthy of introduction, Mr. Al Lieberman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I noted that he suggested that you grab a pastry or a coffee because I was sure that the rumbling I heard was not the train above, but your stomachs, right? Because we're the last panel before lunch, and that's always the classic before getting started on a 12 to 1 o'clock panel. We're delighted to be here. Don't hold it against me. That's why I wear a bow tie so people know I'm a professor now, but it's a late and light gig, and there'll be more about that. We have an amazing topic. I know that many of you are in the business, anything to do with advertising, media, and beyond. Some of us have been involved in that world, and we'll have some things to tell you about the nexus between your world and ours. But the topic is very important, it's kind of basic, and it's simply creatives. Are they born, or can we train them? Okay, that's a pretty important topic. Academics have been talking about it for years and years. But what's going to be fun for us here today, and it's important that we have fun, otherwise we're all going to jump into that lake and disappear under the Black Lagoon. We have with us, and I've had to learn French, Paul Lavoie, je ne sais pas parler français.
Quel fromage.
Très bien.
Monsieur Lavoie.
We have Aldous Grofani, who is a very well-respected Broadway live theater producer. And we've also made him join us at Stern to teach our students about the business of live theater and Broadway. Aileen Wolf, who is what we call, it's a fancy word in our business, practitioner. It means that we actually get paid real money by working outside of the university base. And in addition, she teaches a course on 3 levels, right? Because we have to respect all 3 levels. Undergraduates, MBAs, they're so tough. And then the really tough ones, executive MBAs, and she teaches them about creativity, and she'll talk about that. And my very favorite, a student of mine for at least 1 or 2 fun courses, Shruti. Shruti graduated from a program that we started a couple of years ago because I realized that the reason that you have Heaven's Gate, the reason that you have Ishtar, Waterworld, Jack Carter, do I dare, right? Got pulled out by the Avengers. The reason that you have that is because the suits, which is what I was at one time, before they cut my tie short, and the creatives hated each other, never spoke to each other. And so we crafted a program called the MFA MBA, 3 years. She was one of the first of that fabulous program. She graduated from both, which means that she learned everything from script writing to directing to cinematography, and then she had to do some calculus, poor kid, and get an MBA at the same time, and she's already making movies. So all of us will have something to chat about. All I'm going to do, 2 things. 1, set the stage a little bit. 2, ask them to just introduce themselves because I get bored stiff reading bios, and they can do it a lot better than I can. But in setting the stage, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the definition of creativity? You want to lay that on me? Because you're the man.
Okay, well, that's a good question. Again, just to start off, my name is Paul Lavoie. I started an agency called TAXI. Before that, I was in design. TAXI is really a collaboration between design and advertising, and of course, all good things digital. I think the best way for me to describe it is to see creativity is to see things others don't. So as the wise man once said when he pointed to the moon and the fool looked at the finger, I guess we have to be that kind of fool to look at things differently, to sort of connect dots, things that are not supposed to be, sort of a divergent thinking. So I guess, yeah, seeing things that others don't, and then within TAXI, my company, creativity is essential because that's what defines our company in a very competitive landscape, and creativity, ideas, and storytelling is the value that we bring to our clients in increasing their business. We define it, and it's very much part of our culture. Our culture is based on doubt. One word, doubt, used as doubt the convention, create the exceptional. So we're actually asking people to challenge conventions for a reason, to get to a more exceptional place.
Thank you very much. Good start. Let's take it to the next step. Let's talk about people. Now, we all know that in the agency world, there is the title, creative director, associate creative director, head of the creative department. And then there are all kinds of people who don't have those titles. And sometimes I think that they get ignored when we start to talk about the word creativity. I mean, Steve Jobs, right? Didn't have the title, but he's a pretty creative guy. Bezos, right? Laughs a lot. Why not? He's a billionaire, but he's very creative. Scientists are creative. Journalists who really do great stuff and don't just pick up from somebody's blog, but really come up with a breakthrough idea are creative. And in the wonderful world that I've grown up on, got cleaned up by Mr. Mayor Giuliani, and now, of course, has a bit of a Disneyland tinge. But all of that aside, some of the most creative people that I absolutely die over, the worst moments I have, I know exactly where to go. Not to the bar, that's later. I go to Broadway. And so could I ask my good friend Aldo to just talk a little bit about who he is, what he's done, and how the creativity has impacted what he has grown up with and has built as a live entertainment practice. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, for me, creativity was something that I spent my entire adult life discovering that I had. My early days, I had a graduate degree in economics and finance, and so I was always the smart guy running the company, but the companies I chose to run were in the entertainment business. And what you know about the entertainment business is that if you don't learn how to make it rain, no one has a job. And so in my early days at Jujamson Theaters, which was a tiny, fledgling little company, which were empty theaters, I have to say I discovered, because I wasn't trained to be creative. I was taught to go out and get a job and make money, that I had to find a way to create a show that was different than every other show that was around, so that we wouldn't have to keep inventing new shows. During that 35-year span, I discovered this little group of performing artists in Edinburgh. They called themselves Stomp, and they played around with cigarette lighters and brooms and garbage cans and all kinds of things. And I met with them and said, you know, you can actually turn this into a theatrical event. You know, if you know anything about the theater, the snobbery of our business is that you can't be in the theater unless you have an arc, unless you tell a story, unless you find a way to change the audience from the time they come in to the time they leave. So what we did is we built a set. We found the theater off Broadway. This was 19 years ago. And created the show that everyone now knows as Stomp. And the part that I discovered that I had a slightly creative side to me was the fact that I took someone else's idea. It certainly wasn't my idea to take rhythm, use implements that you at home throw around and don't even think about, and turn it into what is now happily a show that has been to 42 countries, has played to 25 million people, We celebrated our 20th year in London, and we're about to celebrate our 19th year here in New York. They've made 2 IMAX films, and they're now off. They're so rich, these 2 guys, that they're now off making IMAX films under the ocean. So, I mean, for me, the real answer is I discovered creativity. I didn't know I had it, and I think to find it, you got to dare to think.
Terrific. Dare to think. Thank you so much. Aileen, you have taught people about the creative process. Just tell us a little bit about your background, how you evolved into something that some people say, and I'm going to be very provocative and say, that's bullshit. Nobody can train anybody to be creative. You're born with the gift. Aileen.
Actually, Al, I couldn't agree with you more.
Oops.
Oops, so much for provocation. We are all born with the gift of creativity. I actually teach innovative thinking for business because sometimes in business, particularly in the financial areas, where I spent about 12 years on Wall Street before I came to Stern, creativity can be sort of tinged with some fearfulness maybe and some sense of, oh, that's what they do, but, you know, we're the Excel charts guys. So by renaming it innovative thinking, it's gotten a little bit more acceptance. What I do is I really base everything I teach on the fact that everyone is creative. It's just that most of us, as you just said, have had to put our creativity, you know, bury it or put it someplace where it's not really useful, particularly in the business world. There's a great commercial, which I'm hoping most of you have seen. It's a MasterCard commercial with, I think, shows usually around Christmas time of a little, it's one of their commercials where the little girl has been given amazing presents in beautiful boxes, you know, with ribbons and dolls and tractors or whatever. What does she get the most pleasure out of? The big box that she can climb into and push around and throw around even. To me, that's what innovative thinking is about. It's about that moment when you know, I mean, she actually thought inside the box, but a very different kind of box. I strongly believe that people have that, everyone has that in them, and part of what they need is the encouragement to bring it out, which can be really difficult because we live in a society that's very quantitatively based, that our schools are quantitatively based, that we measure on records of things that can be counted, and this is something that doesn't really quantify very easily. It's an absolute joy to teach it, and every single person of the several hundred I've taught has experienced some aspect of creativity, and they love it.
Aileen, thank you. I mean, we have called it, just by borrowing from everything that you know and maybe talk about and maybe hope happens when you pitch a client, tell you a little bit about my time as a real madman, but it's the aha experience. You can get people to get that aha experience personally from something they've done, then you begin to feel that that course or class or seminar that you've taken is worthwhile. Shruti, you had 3 years. My God, 3 years. I can't do 3 years of anything. But you did it, and could you share with us anything that came before you came to the school, and then why this program was appealing to you, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'll come back to you. But the third question is really, what have you done with it since? We may save that. But the first two are, what did you do before? And then why did you decide that you would take 3 years out of your life, basically, and come to our house?
Wow. I don't think I've ever really taken 3 years out of my life. I think I've just kind of expanded it. A lot of people were like, why are you going back to school? And I really want to think of it as I went forward to school. Because I didn't ever stop doing what I was doing, and I just kept building upon it, but just learning it in a different way. So before grad school, I had kind of a range of experiences, and I'm Indian, but I grew up in the Middle East, and I wasn't necessarily exposed to a lot of arts and culture growing up, but I was always kind of painting and reading. But movies was something that was very foreign to me and almost something I wasn't really an active viewer of or a participant of. And it's really kind of funny that that's been kind of where I've ended up. But when I came to the States for undergrad, I started with economics and fine art, and then 10 years later found myself in a program where I was getting an MBA and an MFA. So it was almost like getting, the master's versions of that. And in between, my experience really ranged from figuring out where I could get my visa sponsored, which was a big one because that's really hard in the arts, unfortunately. But I worked at Nylon magazine before, and just before grad school, and I used to run Nylon TV and develop all their video content. But that was just kind of stuff where I kind of fell into the film business and was just learning, and then I worked at nonprofits, and I worked at a hedge fund, and then I worked at Def Jam, and I was just I just made a lot of mistakes, just trying to figure things out and learn and just let myself do that, and then figure out what I liked about certain things and didn't like about it, and then just kind of, my hand's totally shaking. I think I've had so much coffee. And just before Nylon, I used to work at an agency that did strategic communications and then developed their video department. So it was just kind of trying to develop something new in places that had structure. And I've gone through this program, and now I've just produced 2 feature films, and I wrapped 2 days ago. So I'm drinking coffee and I'm catching up on sleep. So that's an odd combination, but and I could talk about that later. What I really gained from the program has been, it's changed the way I've asked questions and the way I interpret information and the way I work with people. And the projects I've worked on have been very collaborative, and it's been a combination of skills I've learned from both the business school and from Tisch.
Thank you, Shruti. Great. I'm going to come back to my friend Paul here because there are a couple of echoes. One of them is something that in a business school, people are afraid to make mistakes. I don't know how many times I have to tell some of my closest students who freak out because they've gotten an A-, nobody gives a shit. I mean, really, nobody looks at those grades. They want to see what you've done. They want to see what you've accomplished. And if you don't make any mistakes, and so I'm coming to my friend Paul to talk about how do you engender a culture in a place where you expect to make money and make a profit. How do you engender the idea of making mistakes and I hope learning from them?
Well, first of all, you have to do it by rote. So I make more mistakes than the other guys, and then they say it's okay. But I think the people that who worry less about mistakes are children. And there was a great exercise that I found online many years ago, and I used it in presentations where you show a picture. And it's simply, you ask the audience, what is this picture? You have 15 seconds to think about it and write down what you see in this picture. And it's basically a white dot on a black screen. And I used to collect, the answers, and I don't do that anymore. I've already figured out what they're going to answer. And here are the 3 answers: a dot, a ball, and a moon. 98%. There's also some weird fuck that comes up with something really interesting, but other than that, and then I show pictures of what children who have not been in school yet answered. And they answer things like, that's a nose on a seal. That's my uncle's nostril. They're seeing things that we're not seeing. So then you go, so what's happening at this? I'm very fortunate to be on the board of VCU, and we have a board member there called Sir Ken Robinson, who is interested in education and creativity. He did a study recently, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, for the UK, where they tested divergent thinking. And they tested it with 3- and 4-year-olds. And they had a rate of 98% of divergent thinking. And this is a study that's, important, robust. It's about 2,000 people, 1,500, 2,000 people. They went back and they studied 5 and 6 years old, and it plunged from 98% to 34%. Then they went to 15-year-olds, and it went down to 10%. Then to just make sure They studied 200,000 24, 25-year-olds and had plummeted to 2%. So something's going on. So I agree with you, Aline. We are born creative. There's some proof, and creatives love research that But I just would, if I'd like to say one last thing, because this is just a setup. The question is, how can we get people back to being little kids again and seeing the world differently? And that's important for, I think, our industry. I think it's very important for our industry, because if you have creatives or people who think differently in one department, you lose. I always try to get people at TAXI, we're 507 offices, and I've always said if we could be, if we have more creative people per square feet, we win. So how can I get the account people? The people who are in our accounting department, the people who are in our production department, the planners, the creatives, how can I get them to be more thinking creatively, and is it even possible? I would like to propose one other piece of evidence that proves that you can all be creative. I have it here somewhere. Here you go. No, going the other way. Okay. So I live in a building in Soho, and on the 6th floor, the top floor, my good friend Brian Baummeisler is an artist, and he brings people from all over the world for a 5-day course on how to be creative. 5 days, and people from all over the world come. And he's blessed to have a mother who is amazing. Her name was Dr. Betty Edwards, and you may have heard, some of you in this audience, a book that she wrote called Drawing from the Right Side of Your Brain. And their notion is there's a rational and there's a more imaginative part to your brain, and you have to unlock. We're taught in school to use the other part of the brain. Okay, so I'll be quick on this because I want to get back to the other guys. 5 days, first thing you do when you arrive is to draw your self-portrait. And as you can see, this gentleman who has nothing, has never had any art background, he draws what he sees, 2 headlights, a sausage, and a couch, and something on the sides. Then, they do their course, and then 5 days later, the last thing they do, and this is one of many, and they're all like this. This is the self. And I brought Brian on stage at Advertising Week. We talked about this. And it's not really how to draw. That's a skill set. It's how to think. And the basis of thinking is to look, to pay attention. And so I'm just saying that we're born creative. I have the research. We know that we can unlock it. And we at TAXI have found ways to unlock that. But I'll get to that later.
Thank you very much. Always amazing to see what can happen when you give some people some tools, some time, and permission. Permission is important, right? Permission is important, and we'll talk about some of the examples that we've had. But there's this word called repurposing, right? Everybody here knows what repurposing is. The days when that short little fellow who left Disney because of some stupid encounters and created $1 billion business from Lion King, we began to understand that repurposing, is one example, I don't want to call it a formula, one process by which you can really create billions of dollars. So I come back to Aldo, who, like everything else that happens in New York City, right, you don't even know who you live next door to until someday you either fall in love with them or trip over them. But Aldo was creating 2 shows, and my little past life with an ad agency that I merged into Gray, called Gray Entertainment and Media, we had fallen in love with Broadway, and we had a little group that would do, for very small budgets, we would market Broadway. And there was Aldo with 2 shows, one called Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and the other called M. Butterfly. And we said, oh my God, and this is not last week, this is not after they did Full Monty and Mamma Mia, this was before. What was that about?
I think, in the case of M. Butterfly, I was at Hugh Jameson, and a guy named Stuart Ostrow came to me and said, John Dexter wants to direct, and John was a brilliant, mean director, just a brilliant guy. And it's a story about a man in China, a French man in China, who falls in love with a Chinese person who is an opera in the Chinese opera, and carries on a relationship for 25 years and discovers that it's a man. And I, of course, said, Stuart, who the hell is going to want to see a play like this? No one's ever going to believe a story like this. And he said, but Aldo, it's a true story. And it is. It was a French diplomat who was charged with espionage at one time. And so we produced this play and brought it. We opened in Washington, D.C., and got killed by David Richards, the critic. And a guy named Geffen, who you might know who he is, was one of the producing partners, abandoned the project and said, I'm not going forward with this. And so I plowed a pile of more money into it, and we brought it to New York. It starred John Lithgow and B.D. Wong, and John played the French diplomat, and B.D. Wong played and dressed as a Chinese female. And it took this town by storm. I mean, we won Best Play. And I think the reason it worked was because it was brilliant theatrically. And it told a fantastic story about what life is really like for people out there that spend a lot of time not talking about it. And Scoundrels was an entirely different experience. You talk about allowing people to be creative. My creative team on Scoundrels was Jack O'Brien, who's won, 5 Tony Awards for directing, Jerry Mitchell, a guy named David Rockwell, who's one of the greatest architects and designers on the planet, decides to become a set designer. And, not to counter what you say, but creativity is absolutely something you want to allow to happen, but it's got to have some order. And my entire job is to control, and I don't know how my last project was in London, Gone with the Wind with Trevor Nunn and John Napier and Andy Neafatu, and it didn't go all that well. But my entire existence is about trying to allow creativity to exist and yet keep it within a boundary that allows something called money to be made, because as much as I'm all for creativity, it has to be funded. We live in a country that doesn't know what funding is, In London, they have a thing called the lottery. Sadler's Wells, in 1 year, got a £95 million award from the UK government to basically renovate its, and I think our national endowment here is less
Keeps
than 200.
shrinking, Aldo.
I think
every
it's less than
year,
$200 million.
shrinking. We wonder how PBS could even exist.
Correct. It's not about politics,
No,
but what it is
no.
I'm a businessman who found out my creativity is about managing creative people and getting them to do a better job. At the same time, I have to build a platform for them to work in so that we can pay for it.
Dynamite. Aldo, thank you very much. I think that just one of those represents the nexus I talked about, because here we were with a Broadway show, and we had no idea how we were going to market that, but the people who were conventional, conservative, not lacking creativity, frightened. That's the other thing that we'll have to bring up as a topic here. Fear can inhibit creativity better and more forcefully than a blanket or a plug in your mouth. You're just frightened. And they said, well, but businessmen who bring money and expense accounts, they're not going to want to see that and get that. And the answer is, then maybe they're not the audience. And they're not the only audience that comes to see theater and wants to be stunned. And the thing that the creative people had to do, because I'm talking about the suits who said, are we really going to spend our time, with the small budget to do a show that can't work? And the creative people said, we can create a story. A story, right? That show is about a story, a true story. And we can 60 seconds is like an hour now, right, in the ad business. But it was 60 seconds that we had, and we showed in that commercial, and I get chills thinking about it, because it's something that you can't even explain until you've seen it, but people could create the idea of watching B.D. Wong dress and then undress and then close on Lithgow in a certain way. Anyway, the point is that the repurposing aspect of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels came from a movie. Today, we have a course that we had to rename called Repurposing Creative Content. And the reason that we do that is because we need the students to not be afraid to take something as far out as, for them, Dexter from Showtime, and make a Broadway show out of it. So when they finish that, they know that they have done something not unlike what the group did for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Aileen, when you find that you're dealing with the resistors, they be the people that we worry about. They don't believe, one, that they're creative. Two, they do not want to be embarrassed because God knows, you know. I mean, we should tell them to all come to class without their clothes on, and then maybe they would stop being embarrassed. They'd see that we all look the same way naked, and then maybe we can get them to create. Could be a horror, right? A horror show. But let's stay with what we call, you know, the process of getting them comfortable with what you do. Now, you can't teach a course here, though maybe some people wouldn't mind, but the point is, can you give us a synthesis of what happens with the people who are, those who welcome it, hey, we always have a few, and they go on and they do great stuff. Those who are resistors, we cannot, you know, no child should be left in the woods or something like that. What do you do? What do you do for those?
First of all, just I would say that probably about 95% of the people that I work with are resistors, whether they are students. College students are the easier resistors, maybe because they're closer to being children and they don't have these walls of resistance. If I'm working with executives, very often they're like, you know, but how can I do this in my company? And I just, you know, so I think what you said before is to give permission, but it's not just permission, it's give permission, show them different ways that they can do this, and also give them a sense of ownership and pride in what they're doing. I can't say that, you know, I can usually do that in 20 minutes or so, but I've done it in fairly short forms. I'd rather take a week or a couple of weeks, as you said, with the creativity. A lot of what I do is to blend some techniques from creativity with some techniques from design thinking and throw in a little bit of neuroscience and a little bit of whatever I think is appropriate. Actually, Paul, if you have the clicker, I will. Oh, thank you so much. Roll it up.
I think you go past the drawings.
Yep. Okay. Okay. One of the things that I like to use a lot is biomimicry. I learned about biomimicry from Janine Benyus, who is, I think, solely invented the field. She's absolutely brilliant, and her belief is that people can actually become innovative by studying what nature does. And I have a couple of examples. This on your left.
Yeah.
My right, your left. It's a termite mound, you know, which, thank God, in New York we only have termites that chew through wood, and they don't leave these great big deposits behind. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's an actual leopard standing behind it. I did not take the picture. But the thing about termite mounds, as biologists found out, is that they maintain temperature. They will stay cooler during the day. They will warm up at night through a very ingenious pattern of internal tunnels. And an architect in Harare, Zimbabwe, built a building based on that principle. It costs less to run than almost any other building in that area, Zimbabwe not being noted for cool temperatures. And it is based on the same kind of air conditioning principles that they use the termites use. Another one, oops. Can we do another one? Locusts. Another fascinating thing. I'm not a biologist at all, but I do find this fascinating. Locusts, which are, I don't know, this is kind of insect heavy. I didn't think of it that way, but locusts are kind of amazing. I mean, if you can not be outside in them, but they zoom around. You get this, swarm of locusts, biblical proportions, but they don't ever crash into each other. How do they manage that? What goes on in their brains? What's built in there? What do they develop that makes it possible to travel in a swarm of thousands and never hit each other? So Volvo, a few years ago, forgot the statistic. Every year in the U.S., 3.6 million car accidents occur. So you've got probably an equivalent number of cars to the number of locusts. We crash into stuff all the time. The locusts don't. Volvo decided a few years ago that they wanted to study this. I don't know that they've actually released a developed car or practice car yet on this, but they decided that there was something that goes on with the locust's internal steering systems that would be really valuable for cars. So when I'm teaching innovative thinking, I give a couple of examples like this and say, what if, that's the Volvo prototype, what if you looked at something like this and found something that would really enable you to think differently? And then usually what I do, I'm going to skip ants because I think we've had enough. I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
Itch,
Okay, I don't think I have any more insects, maybe a butterfly, but.
Yeah.
Then what I do after I've talked to students about how it's possible, and they've already done a couple of things so they don't feel completely blocked, then I'll start handing them photographs of things from nature and just say, apply this. Usually they're in the middle of some kind of project that they bring with them, or they generate a project in the class. I had a recent group of executives, some of whom were working on an adaptation or a repurposing of Post-its. And when they saw this, they said, oh my God, Post-its that can cling to something. And they spun out on it, and they came up with something. I'm not a judge that says, this is marketable, but they absolutely explored a new idea to them. So I'll give things like this. This is an aloe plant. The symmetry is so amazing. Feather, I think from a peacock. Peas in a pod. Another group that did, they wanted to work on airline travel, which everybody agrees is abysmal, and they looked at. Yeah, that's how we all feel. So they said, okay, what can we do so that we feel like people and not peas in a pod? And they just experimented around with all kinds of things. So one of the things that I do that I really love to do is the natural things in spider web, which is always a wonderful metaphor for being creative. That's one of the things I do, and maybe when we go around another time, I'll talk about one of the other things.
Fantastic. I no longer itch because I like spiders.
Another insect.
Shruti, one of the things that is amazing for me, honestly, and you haven't even heard this from me, but when I spoke to you at one of the recent functions we had, and you talked about, actually getting involved with and producing a movie, which we know is teamwork. And when we listen to some of the things that Paul was talking about in terms of 500 people, or in some of the places I've been, it's 5,000 people, and how do you get people to A, work together, B, do it in a creative environment so that you don't have that pulling apart that some of you may have experienced, right? When whomever says, I disagree, that doesn't work. And somebody else says, but you haven't tried it, you're gonna, and all of those discussions that go on, and what happens is, we lose time. Time is not bad. We lose money, that is bad. And then we lose the project, and that's a disaster. That's a disaster. So can you share with us some of the things, you don't have to name names, we try to be semi-anonymous here. What did you experience?
I can say one name if you want.
Huh?
I can say
Go
one
ahead.
name. Okay.
Did it work?
I've just produced a couple of features, and I've been working with James Franco on those, and those essentially started as class projects at NYU that I think were very ambitious, and we didn't really know how they were going to end up. And so it started as an adaptation of a collection of poetry, the first one last semester, by C.K. Williams, and there were about 11 directors. And so I worked with James on, developing the curriculum and building the class, and we had essentially a project on our hands where how do you make a feature with 11 directors? And there's a reason why it's not done often. And as my first film, I really went through a real interesting process. And what was exciting, and what's exciting when you're working with teams, even from the creative process, is that you really have to trust that everyone involved, is there for a reason and they're involved for a reason, and you have to just trust that they're going to bring their interest and their skill set to the project. And I think when you're kind of micromanaging everything is when you sometimes kill the process. And so as much as, when I'm on set and I'm just trying to, there's a reason I have like a team that I want with me, and I just know that they're doing the best job that they can. If they're not, then we have to get it up to speed. There's a reason. But when you're making a movie, there's such an emotional connection with the project and the process and the people you're working with that you have to just be able to make the experience as enjoyable as hopefully you hope the product is. Because it's very interesting because you can have a really crappy experience on set and end up with an amazing movie. And at the end of the day, that's what people are seeing. But for my side of it, these are teams of people I want to keep working with and building relationships with. So the process is really important. And we just did another movie with, again, 10 directors. I can't wait to work with one. And I'm really excited about them because they were an odd combination of feature films that were adaptations with many voices that we kind of built. We had to kind of find an arc and a structure for everyone to get on the same page and move forward, because it would really rock the boat if anybody wasn't delivering. So how do you motivate people to kind of respect everyone else's involvement was a big challenge for us, but we got through it, and we are in post-production on both, and we've ended up with amazing Hollywood talent on these low-budget films, which still blows my mind.
That is an experience. It terrifies me to think about more than one director. Yeah. You have a story to carry forward with you to other projects. Connection, getting people to move in a certain direction. Paul, how do you find that in looking at what I call the project in the advertising business, I'm sure it hasn't changed from the Mad Men days. It's still about a client buying. So the client can be the 11 directors or more. Where does that come into play, and are you able to use the kind of research that you talk about, and we can touch on some, because research is supposed to come with the academic world, right? We research ourselves to death. But for you, it should give you support when you go, what do you mean you don't like it? It's going to work.
Well, I think what you're alluding to is collaboration, and whether we like it or not in the field that we're working in advertising, design, interactive, we just have to accept the fact that we're going to have to collaborate. We're going to have to collaborate with each other. We're going to have to collaborate with clients. We're going to have to collaborate with partners who are going to produce stuff. And so, and it could be a shit show. And I came from that shit show. When I started Taxi, if I had met a guy like Aldo, I'd be in business with him like that. Because what Aldo's talking about, and I've just met him for the first time, but he is creating the conditions for success. He's creating the conditions for creativity, to interact, to collaborate, to make something successful. Because ideas, we all have ideas. But what we're really concerned is ideas that get out into the marketplace and make a difference. They make a difference in your careers. They make a difference for your company. They make a difference for everyone. So the notion of collaboration is great. And I spent most of my career as a creative, but my job is not to create campaigns and things anymore. But it's always been to say, what can we do to create those conditions? Because just asking people to be creative is irresponsible. You can walk away, it's not going to happen. So here's a couple of things we did. First of all, the most important thing is, who do you hire? One of the things that I found that is a very interesting connection with all the people that work, most of the people who work at our company, is we look for generosity. I like generosity because generosity is, excuse me, is interesting because you can't get generous people who are not confident. You can't be generous and not be confident. So there's a notion of confidence, and the confidence to fail, to make mistakes, and you know. So that's important. The second thing is, what's the structure? The reason we called it TAXI was you only get 4 people in TAXI. So we don't have departments. We put people in little, small little pods, and they're accountable and they're empowered. Next thing is we may be 500 people, but we never grow an office more than 150 people because we looked at some research studies with American Army, Roman Army, African tribes, and we said, okay, so we stopped at 150, and we've done that, and that works. The other thing is bonus, money, incentive. And 2 things happen. First of all, we have one P&L, 7 offices, so there's a notion of collaboration. If you don't do that, people don't want to collaborate. You can say collaborate, but they're not going to share resources if they're not being incentivized to do that. And the second thing is we bonus people, we give them extra money if they hit 3 things. Great work, and we have ways of you know, sort of quantifying that. We have financial health. We're out of business. I'm not on the stage. I'm looking for a job. So we have to make sure that this thing is working. And finally, group harmony. So we put these things together, and then we kind of put this whole DNA into doubt. We actually, you know, get great skill sets coming to TAXI. But I expect that writers can spell. I can expect that the designers can kern and they know the architectural environment of the internet. But the most important currency at our company, and the people who make more money at our company, is thinking. Because that's the foundation of everything, and thinking differently. And we find ways to inspire people to think differently. So that's what I'm saying, Aldo. I think it's important to say we all want to be creative, but if you're managing people, what are you doing to make them feel good? And they're all different, you know. Sometimes you do have to instill fear, and I have. But most often you might have to hug. Depends on who you're interacting with. Some people, you throw fear on them, you've lost them. Forget it. You're just wasting time. And other people, if you don't give them a kick in the ass, sorry, they're not going to produce. So I think you have to improvise with that. But my point is, create the conditions to channel great people to do great things.
Paul, you know, there is sometimes, it's like almost a shameless plug, but the hugging thing, I mean, right now, a man's name doesn't mean anything to you, but John Sexton is the president of New York University. In effect, he is the CEO in charge of 40,000 people. Only 10,000 of them are administrators, the rest are students, and his concept is, and he's, you know, all over the world. We're going to talk about that in the remaining 8 minutes. Looks like our time is getting close, so we're going to do it very fast. But he's got satellites for NYU all over the world. He's on a plane to Abu Dhabi every week because he decides also what we're hearing from Paul is that you also, in motivating, do it yourself. Because if you can't do it, then it's hard for you to push somebody to do it as well, and he has done it. Sexton goes to Abu Dhabi every week to teach a class on the campus. It's now called NYU Abu Dhabi, and for us, it's a role model, right? It's a role model. And the only other thing, again, a kind of a connective with thinking, we who come from the advertising business and start teaching come with a huge burden called an inferiority complex. You know how big that is? I can't do this. What kind of, yeah, and so what you do is you teach everything that isn't nailed down. And when you get to 14 courses a year, which is about 3 times everybody else's course load, you go, okay, now I'm okay. And then one day somebody says, hey, you're doing fine. You know what? Get rid of half of that and start thinking. Start thinking. Spend time thinking, less being a teaching machine. Global is a big deal for us on the campus. Half of our students come from every nation in the world. More than a third of our students go to every nation in the world where we have NYU satellites. And Aldo just came back from Latin America, and I'd love him to just talk about that part of the business that I know he teaches to his students, but I know he lives, which is, it may be called Broadway, but Broadway now has a stage that's called 55 countries. Just share with us, because I think after that we're going to
In 2 minutes.
blow it out.
When I started in the theater, basically it was New York. There were theaters all over the country, and someone invented the system of touring, which is an entire challenge of how to take this creative thing, put it into trucks, and drive it around the country week after week after week. And what I discovered in the process is that people go to the theater. In fact, I think going to the theater began in Germany, not even in England. You know, Shakespeare wasn't the guy that invented I think the Romans may have had something to do with it. In any event, theater is something that's live, which means you only can do it in a certain number of seats at any period of time, and that's the economic challenge. The only way to make money in the theater is to take the very same thing like Stomp, create 4 companies of it, and go to 50 different countries. So every country, every continent on the planet has been basically exploited to death, and then there's the new dark continent, is South America. So about 6 weeks ago, I called a friend of mine and I said, you know, I'm tired of taking shows to South America and they basically go into this black hole. I'd like to go down and meet all of these people that are tired of working with assholes. They need to be at least 50 and older, successful in their business, and want to do business with other people that are tired of doing business with assholes. I know that's a stupid idea, except that I spent 11 days, I went to 6 countries, 8 cities, and came back home with a cartel of 6 really successful guys, and we formed a company called Broadway Suit, and we have yet to do a show. But I think next February, I did a show called Tap Dogs a million years ago, which I'm touring again this fall. That's the way we pay our overhead. We're going to take Tap Dogs down to South America. We're then taking Stomp to South America, but we're not taking Americans to South America. We're going to South America, and we're going to start from scratch. And I'm now going to start doing what I've been doing my entire life, including here in New York, in South America. And I urge everybody out there, if you want to be creative, find out what everybody else in the world is doing. This is the greatest city on earth, but they know how to do things too, and they have something called money, and they're willing to give it to you if you come there with a good idea. And I like that idea.
Aldo, Paul, Aileen, Shruti, thank you very much. We really had a lot of fun talking to you guys. Enjoy your lunch. Not much time to ask questions, but we weren't sure where we were going to take this discussion. I hope that you have learned a little bit about what takes place kind of uptown on that wonderful world of academe. We're doing stuff that you're doing. We're just doing it with students to prepare them to join your business, your companies, and the greater world of creativity out there, prepared to not be afraid. Thanks very much. It was great to talk to you.